It's wonderful to grow up with 15 or 16 sisters.
We were really sisters.
Exactly.
And yeah, it was a special one. I would have traded for nothing. I loved every minute of it.
And we didn't have some of the larger classes that the 60s had, but there was always this common thread of sisterhood that was present in each and every class.
And it was more like living at home maybe with older sisters.
It was like having 19 sisters. And what it did for me was gave me an appreciation for very different kinds of people.
Like I met Lynette and Kathy in 7th grade, and we're still like sisters from the Ellis experience.
I did end up loving Ellis, and I still feel very, very close to these girls, sisters, accidental sisters.
In April of 2019, we had our 100th anniversary of the founding of the school. And I decided it's now or never. We're getting older, and I wanted to get the stories of these alumni before it was too late. The history of the school was falling into obscurity, so the time was now to do that. There were also questions I had throughout my life about what the school meant. And was it unique, or was it just like other schools of the era? There were questions I wanted to explore about my own experience at Ellis. When I think about the impact that the school had on me, honestly, I have to say it was mostly about social mobility and how I experienced the rest of the world as a result of my experiences at Ellis.
When I graduated from school, I was pretty sure I could do anything.
I had core values, I guess I would say, to go on to college. I didn't really have a pathway. Ellis gave me that pathway. It gave me a sense of stability to really learn and grow and develop.
I studied very hard. I came to the conclusion, because I was a scholarship student, that no one was going to leave me any money. And the way to go forward in this world was to get an education. I recognize that had I gone to a public school in Philadelphia, things might have turned out differently.
We learned life skills. We had chores, we had to clean, we didn't have to cook, thank God, I still don't know how to cook, but we had to set the tables, be waitresses, sewing, laundry. There was a lot of discipline. Right. And for me, I needed that.
When I was very little, I wanted to be a boy because I felt boys had more rights. As I got older, I wouldn't want to be a boy anymore. But when I was young, I thought things went better for boys than for girls.
I would have been a very different person if I had stayed in the public school system and hadn't had the experience of only girls in the classes, so you're not afraid to talk or be smart.
My mom was a really strong person. I had never seen a father because I was an infant. So I had never seen a mother that consulted any man or consulted anybody. A decision needed to be made, she made it.
I followed my sister, and I remember her saying to me that, you won't have to fight off boys in the class. And you know what, when I went to a co-ed college, I thought that was true. I was one of the few young women in the class who would really, if a male said something and I disagreed with it, I had no trouble and felt very comfortable saying, well, this is my view. And I got a reputation for that at Duquesne, actually.
I went into the Navy, went to college, graduated from college, and then went into the Navy, active duty as an officer. And it was a predominantly, at the time, male field. There weren't a lot of women. And it didn't bother me at all.
After I got my PhD, I taught, I was an associate professor of economics for several years. Then I worked at Virginia Power, which is a big power company, for 16 years. I was the first woman director, the first woman manager, the first woman district manager, the first woman officer. I rose to the position of vice president and treasurer and so forth.
My stepfather, when I was about a junior or senior in high school, he said, well, what do you plan on doing? And I said, well, secretarial work of some sort. He said, did you ever think of going into business machines? And I said, like what? And he said, well, there's all kinds of business. He said, there's a place called IBM. And he said, why don't you look in? He said, I know they have schools to teach people how to use their machines. So I became a key punch operator at RCA Victor.
We were told that we were the creme de la creme. We were the best things going, and I sure we believed it, thought it was absolutely true, and I guess I've lived my whole life on that premise that whatever I'm called to do, I can do. And all that confidence came from school.
Extraordinary girl, you're the girl that makes me smile.
Ellis truly did start in 1919 with the arrival of the first girls. Of course, it started long before that with his will and countless meetings and looking for where to have this school. But in 1919, the first little girls arrived.
This was started in the early 1920s. And so obviously the thinking came out of circumstances before that. And there would be the feeling, the widespread feeling that boys could take care of themselves better, boys could work.
There were a fair number of educators around that time who felt that boys and girls needed to be educated separately because they were just too different. They weren't all raving sexists, but many of them were. And there were developmental theories at the time that were claiming that if girls were stressed too much, right, by intellectual pursuits, that bad things would happen to them. So I think the idea was that in some people's minds, that girls would benefit from a certain kind of education and they would be better mothers that way, right? And so that was behind some of the push to have the single-sex classrooms.
There was a lot of focus on skill development. The first Vocational Education Act came in the same period during the Wilson administration, which would have been just before the Ellis School. So there certainly was concern with helping people learn practical skills and learn a trade. Concern about children, and a lot of historians have written about this for the entire Western world, really flowered with the Industrial Revolution or the late 19th century in many parts of Europe as well as America. And, so what to do with poor children, what to do with working children, what to do with children, who didn't go to college or were well-to-do. There was a big push for institutionalization in the early decades of the 20th century. Institutionalization was still big, through the 50s into the 60s. There started to be advocacy against this. And, it took a while, really till the 70s and 80s, until deinstitutionalizing became, policy, essentially. Your themes here of, there are orphanages, there are single-sex schools, there are trade schools, all kind of fits in with that.
For most girls on scholarship, the reason they ended up at Charles Ellis School was that their moms had to work. They had many children. There was no child care. So this was a good place for them to be. And then their brothers would often be sent to the Stephen Girard School in Philadelphia. For girls on tuition, oftentimes it was because they would get a better education at the school, or there was some disruption in their home life.
There were lots of people who had similar experiences about being inconvenient truths in their families. A lot of people whose parents paid for them to be there. I would say I'm definitely one of them. I wasn't living with my parents. I was living with an aunt and uncle because my stepmother and I didn't really blend. And I think I was a little too much for my aunt and uncle. So my grandmother sent me off to prep school. And I was relieved to get away, honestly. I had a very conservative set of, aunt and uncle were just terrified with this young person that wanted to wear lipstick.
I was already at Ellis when my father died. He wasn't in the picture in my 7th grade year. He died suddenly in my 8th grade year. But I had already been accepted. They had accepted me just based on his absence.
There was no Social Security. Social Security, I think, was inaugurated in '36 and had not been fully funded by the time we were entering school. And I know my mother had never worked until my father died. She was 43 years old.
I came from an orphanage up in Germantown, and my mother was unwell and was concerned that my sister was out at Ellis. She was concerned that she would pass, and she wanted her girls to be together.
I lived out in the country, and the public school was not accredited by the state. So that meant no chance of college.
I guess it was in 9th grade. My mom and I didn't get along very well at all. And I heard about Ellis, and it was kind of my chance to escape.
My father had passed away when I was 1. My brother went to Girard College, and through my brother going to Girard College, my mother found out about Charles E. Ellis School for Girls.
My mother, the reason I went to Ellis was that she went back to work at Provident Mutual Trust Company. And she was one of the girls of this vice president who was on the board of trustees of Ellis College School for Fatherless Girls. And he found out that he had a widow with a little girl and told her about the college and made arrangements for me to go there. It was a major sacrifice for her. And she came to see me every week. At that time at Ellis, we went home every other weekend. And then it was once a month, but I saw her every week.
I was glad, when I look back on it, I had a better time. My stepfather was an alcoholic. They fought all the time. And I didn't have to live through a lot of that my sister did.
I was an only child, and there were not many other children around where I lived. That I think they wanted me to, go to a boarding school and get some socialization.
I was not the princess that my parents wanted me to be. I was not a good student. I was I had an older sister who was perfect, and I never was. My name wasn't on the honor roll in the paper every month. And so off to boarding school I went.
My father died when I was 11. He was a doctor, and he was on staff at Bryn Mawr Hospital. And there were 3 of us. I was the oldest, and it was rather sudden. And my parents were going through a divorce at the time. So not a happy period.
For me, being in the military, going from school to school, didn't ground me academically. I knew I wanted to get ahead in the world, like my aunts and uncles all had done, but moving from school to school wasn't going to do that for me. So Ellis was for me a lifesaver opportunity to settle down, be in an environment, a good environment.
The guidance counselor at the public school that I attended had taught my mother when she was in 7th grade and my sister when she went to elementary school. And when I went, she was the guidance counselor. And she was the one that researched and found Ellis. And she did some tests, which I didn't have any idea why I was taking all these tests.
They gave me tests. I had to take tests. And I went with my mother, I think it was in July. It was very hot. And we took the bus and out to 69th Street. And I was so nervous, I threw up. At the gate, was so nervous that I wouldn't make the grade.
I had to take a test, and it was an intelligence test, but I didn't have any sense of, am I doing well, not doing well? I just knew what it was.
The reason I fell in love with Ellis was truly the grounds and the building. It was just beautiful. It was really beautiful. That main building with those huge columns.
It was so beautiful. After Germantown, Philadelphia, and going out to public school in Philadelphia, it was wonderful.
The first time I saw the campus, I had to come out for a physical. I just thought it was the most beautiful place I had ever been.
I just landed here as happy as a clam because all that sadness in my house was not there. It was a big fun slumber party. I remember some girls were in the cottage crying, and I didn't understand it.
I was a little shocked when my mother told me I was going to be going away to a school, but I liked it here. I loved the smallness of it. It felt small. I knew everybody. We all knew each other. We knew the house mothers. We knew the people, the teachers. We ate dinner with them. We ate all our meals. I liked it.
We had to walk away, 2 and 3 times with this walking, and I think it really made us strong. And the food was very good. I mean, the nutrition was good. So I think I benefited through life up until, but I really think that exercise and the fresh air and the communing with nature, we always noticed the trees and we laughed, and the sky at night, and it was really an experience that a city kid wouldn't have.
Mendelssohn Meehan came on board in 1923. He was hired by Dr. Karl Aretz, who was the second president of Ellis. And the Meehans were very, very famous in the nursery business in Philadelphia. The son, Mendelssohn, came to Ellis and became the horticulturalist for our campus. He started in 1923 and realized the first buildings went up in 1922. So he had a blank slate in which to plant all the trees and the bushes that we remember that made it into such a beautiful campus. The 320 acres were filled with over 600 varieties of trees and bushes, and in 1936 it was named a nationally recognized arboretum, the biggest on the whole East Coast. When it was sold, the arboretum was cared for by ARCO, and they did a very, very good job. But subsequent sales of this parcel and that parcel, so much of it has been cut down, bulldozed, so it no longer exists.
The value of living in a boarding school environment is that you have friends around all the time, people to talk to play with, to share stories with, whatever. Also, there's a very clear routine and discipline that you have to follow, which has benefited me in my life, to be sure. However, everyone followed the same rules. Nobody got to make age-appropriate decisions that you might get to make when you're living at home. There is a trade-off, I think, to being in such a sheltered environment. It ends up being also a very controlled environment.
We had kitchens in the cottages and dining rooms, and the house mothers and the older girls cooked. The little girls cleaned up. In 42, they decided, because there was gas rationing, it was hard to get tires for trucks and so forth. It was easier for a delivery truck to come up to one kitchen instead of going to 6 or 7 different kitchens all over the campus. So they shut down the kitchens in the cottages. Those were now turned into apartments, and teachers lived in those apartments. And Cottage 6 was the cottage that was refinished Downstairs was the dining room and the kitchen, and then upstairs was the infirmary. The cottage system was changed also. Now it was all one grade in one cottage.
We had a regimen. We ate at a time, we studied at a time, we did these things. And on the other hand, we didn't have to make choices. We didn't have to think for ourselves, or I didn't think for myself.
It was my job to do the pajamas for all the girls. And it was summertime, and it was very humid. I had to wash them down in the basement, and I got pneumonia. And I was in Presbyterian Hospital for a whole month.
Who paid for that, by the way?
They did.
Every week you got change sheets. You had to fold your sheets and pile them in the bathroom by the laundry. And in, oh gosh, I guess this was by about 10th grade, Mrs. Grammer was our house mother. And somebody, God forbid, didn't fold her sheet. So the bell rang in the school, in the cottage, and we all gathered down at Mrs. Grammer's room. And she said, everybody up to the bathroom. Okay, we all filed up to the bathroom. And she said, everybody take this sheet and fold it, put it on the pile, and then go, leave. Okay. Each one had to do that. There were, at the time, there were 28 of us. So 28 times that sheet got messed up, folded, and put on top of the laundry pile. That was to teach us you folded your sheet, because God bless the girl who didn't fold her sheet. If we found out who it was, she heard it plenty from the rest of us, you know.
In the morning when you got up, you might have had to be a waitress or an assistant waitress. Like, the food was really good in the Commons, but you might have had to go help set up. And then after that, it was clean up and then go to class all day. And then after class, they had great extracurriculars. So we either did sports, we had a good field hockey team, we had a basketball team, we had an excellent gym teacher, Betty Brown Black, B3. She had been here for 50 years or more or something. And then we even had, like, we did ballet. Donna, you and I did ballet together. Then we had the choir. And so there was, like, you did something every day after school from 4 to 6? And so you might have had to go back and waitress again. You only had a waitress like once a month or something like that. And then after dinner, you had study hall. And that was 7 to 9, and maybe then you had a half an hour of free time, maybe an hour, and you had to be back in your room, in your house here.
To be able to receive mail, your mothers had to approve who you got mail from. If a boy, God forbid, should write to you, that letter was sent to mom.
With house mothers, they made a big difference. When we started as little 9-year-olds, we had somebody named Mrs. Moore. She was just the sweetest, nicest grandmotherly type. She was strict, and she was really sharp. She was really on the ball. She knew when you were trying to pull something over. But we just, I loved her.
Bertha Clayton was her name. That was in Cottage 5. When Bertha called, you answered, yes, ma'am.
They kept us in line. They would answer questions. They were not surrogate mothers in that sense. And there were some that I liked better than others over the years, but I had no trouble with them. They were not nasty in any way, and they were helpful people who helped us get along.
Tuesdays were the days that Miss Clayton had off. The sub would come in. Well, of course, the sub didn't know the rules and regulations. So
I see where this is going.
Yeah, we would raid the kitchen. Peanut butter got taken, cookies got taken. We'd have parties up in our bedrooms after lights out. Here I am with my arms loaded with cookies. Yes, Miss Clayton. And I walked down and she said, "What do you have?" And I said, "A few cookies." She said, "What's in the other hand?" "A few more cookies." She said, "Very well. I will see you after school." and I got to scrub the attic floor, and it was cement.
The whole staff was wonderful. You know, I mean, they were very kind, and the dean of students even took me to Philadelphia so that I wouldn't have to ride the bus to go to my mother's funeral.
Boys were nice, and I was eager to get to know them better.
I think our life revolved around the dances that we had. I just looked through my yearbook and see most of it is about the dances that we were either getting ready to go to or memories of ones we had just attended. We danced with boys from Girard and we danced with boys from Williamson. And I eventually married one of them.
I was really flat-chested, and we would have those dances with the schoolboys at different schools, and my classmates decided that I needed to have breasts. So they stuffed newspaper in there. And I went to the dance, and I danced with a young man, and it was itching so much. I then went and took all my breasts out and put them behind the decorations because it was so terrible. So I literally, and the boy's name was James Bushy, and the exciting part was, he didn't notice anything because I like sports. I love sports, and men usually love to talk about sports. But anyway, I literally went from having these massive paper chests to just being flat-chested.
All those wonderful dances.
Those mandatory dances.
Right. Where you lined up by your height and got matched with anybody who was nearly your height.
I hated the dances that they had. Oh my gosh, we hid in the locker room for half the dances.
After a few dances, Dr. Look had a white line painted sort of down towards his house. And at the end of the road that went out to 252. And after a dance, you were allowed to walk your date to the white line, but you better not put a foot over the white line. But when we were seniors, that law was rescinded, and we weren't even allowed to go that far.
In high school, we were taken to Valley Forge Military Academy, where we were supposed to engage in dancing with the men there, and that was fun. That was our only experience with meeting men. I mean, boys, you know. So some of the girls cried they didn't like who they were with.
It was very rare for somebody to actually have somebody they knew as their date. I remember Jean McDowell. It was like, wow, she's so lucky. She knows the guy.
There was a boy from the Valley Forge Military Academy that I dated, and in my senior prom, he informed me that he had actually had to get married over Christmas because he had gotten a girl pregnant. So I actually was at my senior prom with a boy who had knocked up a girl, and he was married.
The desire to leave Ellis was based principally on, oh my gosh, I don't want to be in a girl's environment all my life.
In 1948, decades before I got there, they started accepting tuition girls, and they had to beef up the academics in order to attract that type of student, paying student. By the time I got to college and compared my academic preparation with the other students, I noticed there were some holes in my Ellis education. For instance, we didn't have physics, nor did we have calculus. And these were two big detriments to the fact that I wanted to be a medical student.
Ellis classes were a lot more difficult than public school. If you didn't take a college prep course, you took a secretarial or commercial course. He used to always tease, and he said, one thing, you girls can always wait tables. You know, because we gained the experience doing that in the dining room.
Right. It gave me such a good basic education. I mean, writing, reading. I mean, to this day, you know, there's no holes in my background.
We had home ec, and we learned to sew.
Oh yeah.
And we sewed dresses, and I remember making my first halter dress. I had it for a long time, and I had the fancy heels with the wedgie heels. I took that as my career. I don't do it now, but for health reasons. But I made window treatments as about 7-10 years ago. So I learned sewing here, and I was able to carry that to my my career. I struggled, and they accommodated me.
We had the honors program, and the main purpose of the honors program was to get us into college. And there were 4 of us who were going to go to college, and we had special courses just for us. So I had a very good education. It was limited because you could learn Spanish, you couldn't learn any other language, so there was a limit to what you could do. And music, you could be in the choir, practice the piano.
Everybody in that school had a kindness to the students, and I think they did the best that they could do with people who really didn't want to pay attention, like me.
The teachers were caring and really developed us. I remember Dr. Joaquin Stable, and I learned to speak. My husband was born in Chile, and his family is all bilingual, so having that background, and he really taught me a lot. I was able to, we have a home in Chile that we can go over there and hang out and feel very comfortable.
There were wonderful teachers like Miss Myers, my art teacher, who painted this for me. Martha Barron Barrett was our phenomenal history, geography, social studies, POD, Problems of Democracy, one of my favorite classes. And she made sure we were very connected to the world. In fact, the Women Are Fighting for Legal Equality, she was the sponsor for that.
Martha Barrett, who taught back then, we actually sat through the Watergate trials together. She found out that I was interested. She taught POD, Problems of Democracy, and we actually went down to Washington, D.C. and sat through the first Watergate trials. We had this little red ashtray that you lifted up and you were allowed to smoke in the room. So we were like crouched in the back having our cigarettes and watching them do this and do all the diagrams up front and the whole bit. It was tremendously exciting.
I think it's a really good thing to have your education unisexed, because I just think, particularly for girls, and maybe not so much now, but back then, girls were still limited. You just didn't have the same choices or the same rights. You had certain things you could be.
I think educationally it was really great to be just girls because we got all the opportunities. Right. We don't have to share them. Developing relationships with boys and men and romances and stuff like that, I think we were a little undereducated.
Those opportunities were available to us where they might have been directed towards our male counterparts back then.
As a 9th grader, I wanted to go home because I kept pointing out to my mother that the world was co-ed. I found it very difficult as a young adult to interact with men, boys and men, because I hadn't done it since I had been 8 years old.
I like just girls.
Why?
Oh, you didn't have to, dress up, or I don't know. You could just be your true self without trying to impress boys.
I ended up being invited to attend an AAUW, American Association of University Women, conference on the question of gender in the classroom. And it was quite controversial at the time because the monograph that they subsequently issued said, we're not sure what the consequences are of single gender education. The speaking up and the attention issue is one that hasn't been studied in the single sex context as frequently as the other variables, such as performance on standardized tests and subsequent career aspirations and achievements.
You said something really interesting, which is the expectations and biases of the teachers. The teachers at our school predominantly were women. So what I'm hearing you say is that one of the factors here that could be overriding any single sex advantage is the fact that we felt comfortable because there were women teachers.
Yeah, so that's one, right. So that's one possibility. And it's certainly true that although in elementary school, the teachers are still mostly women,
right,
that once you get to middle school and high school, then it flips, right? So then you have predominantly men who are teachers, and that would be when you would be getting into the heavy math and science and literature courses. Surprisingly enough, with all the claims that school environment will make a difference in attitudes or career aspirations, there's actually less evidence in that arena. There have been several pretty convincing studies about the women's colleges not really making a difference. I haven't seen anything that would suggest that there's any kind of consistent disadvantage. And so I think it is very important to make that point that we're not saying it's bad, but the research suggests it's simply no difference.
The extracurriculars such as sports, choir, clubs are fairly standard at most schools, whether they're boarding schools or not, but not so much for the earlier arrivals or for poor, disadvantaged children that the school was founded for. DeFilippo's history of Ellis refers to the school during this period as having, quote, all types of activities offered by fashionable private schools, end quote. Horseback riding, symphony, theater, demitas, teas, dances with elite boys' schools, sports competitions with elite girls' schools on the main line in Philadelphia. As a scholarship girl from rural Pennsylvania, when I got to Ellis, I soaked up the manners and mores of the upper classes. I was aware that this would serve me well as I went out into the world. It opened doors for me that would have been closed had I not gone to Ellis.
I just have memories of going horseback riding, of going, to plays and the ballet, and I wouldn't have been able to do that. My mom had 4 kids. My dad died when I was 3, and she had 4 kids to raise, and she had to work, and I wouldn't have had those experiences, and I wouldn't have met these amazing women.
At Christmas time, our choir would go over to media, to Christmas carols.
I went to the symphony to see Eugene Ormandy. It made me interested in music for the rest of my life.
We had tickets to the Forum and we went to the theater. I remember seeing Sir Laurence Olivier in Hamlet. That comes back to me, and I remember seeing Finian's Rainbow.
I was allowed to sing in a sextet at Ellis, and I was a terrible singer. And the understanding was that if I didn't sing too loud, I could be in the sextet.
I enjoyed the choir. I was on several sports teams, but that was the life was going to school, going to study hall, playing the sports that I played, and Sunday services singing in the choir.
I discovered art that I really liked it, and when I was at Ellis, Sandy, Harry, and I took art classes in Philadelphia on Saturday mornings. Back then it was the Philadelphia College of Art. That really opened my eyes to going to art school and doing something creative like that.
The women's movement, oh yes, we actually started a club at Ellis while I was there called Waffle. Women are fighting for legal equality. And we would meet weekly.
What year?
Probably formed in about 73. And we'd meet weekly and just talk about women's issues. And I think probably that was one of the most formative parts of my teenagehood and learning to be a strong, independent woman.
I helped found the whole group Waffles, which was back then like a women's lib group. I don't think we even called it feminist back then. Remember the one book, Our Bodies, Ourselves, that we, went through as well? That was just incredible. But it was really alerted to a lot of the stuff that I ended up fighting for and doing a whole bunch of stuff later on.
Like what?
I was one of the few ones that, I guess it was in Jersey, that I burn a bra. Different things like that. But I've been pretty much an activist for women's rights my whole life.
We played with our coach, Betty Black. Now, I had experienced another coach before that. And when Betty came in January of 1960, she had her ideas, which really did a lot for the Ellis girls. She believed as many girls should play in every game as possible. So she was looking out for the girls and their development, not just the score.
I was not particularly a good athlete, but I was frequently like a captain on a team, but I wasn't a particularly good athlete. I played basketball, I played hockey, and did different things like that, but I wasn't a particularly good athlete. But it was fun. I mean, it was fun to play on those teams, and Ellis would go around and travel around to different schools. We were never particularly good. But I learned a lot about the sport, and you had to learn all the rules.
I played hockey at Ellis, but also in college. I loved it. And I learned to swim. I became a lifeguard. And we swam in, we had these swimming ballets that I was in.
Tell me why the stars do shine. Tell me why the ivy climbs. Tell me why the sky's so blue. God made Tonawanda, that's why we love you.
When you were admitted, you didn't begin in September. You began at the end of June or July. And all the classes entered as campers at Camp Tonawanda.
In the early 30s, 1932, Camp Tonawanda was started, as well as the Ellis Summer School. Little is known about the Ellis Summer School, but it was one of the largest on the East Coast. College preparatory for kids who wanted to go through in 3 years. They could take extra courses, and the faculty was outstanding. The students lived in the cottages that were there for the summer. The camp also started that same year, modestly, just by the pond, by Cottage 9, had little fires and camped out on nice weather and all this. But quickly, Dr. Look developed the 100 acres just north of White House into a more viable camp setting. The pond there was called Lake Tonawanda, and there were 16 bungalows for 8 girls each built up on the hillside, as well as a director's residence, a big dining hall, a meeting area, the campfire. It really grew, and it lasted until 1955. Local Newtown Square girls also attended that camp.
We were the first class in 1942 to enter school after the war began. The war began in December, and I think we showed up the end of June or the beginning of July in 42. And I remember that we were told to be sure to bring our rationing cards. That I remember. And of course, I was sort of scared. I guess I was 10 or 11. And but I loved camp right away. I loved camp. I was in cabin 3, and B. Pyle was my counselor. We slept 7 to a cabin with 7 girls with 1 counselor.
There was a Lake Tonawanda, and on one side of the lake was a little building, and that was called the Arts and Crafts Building. And at one end, there was a separate room that had a little furnace in it. So in the summertime, the rest of the building was for the craft work. In the wintertime, when the lake would freeze and we'd go ice skating on that lake, we could stop into the little room with the heater, you know, and get warmed up.
The summer camp was enormous amount, very organized, a lot of fun. We ate a lot. And I can remember helping cook because when the corn came in, we ate, like as much corn as we possibly could. And every Saturday night there was a movie at the big place where we ate. We did a lot of sports. I learned how to play tennis, which was kind of unusual for a poor kid from Philadelphia.
Moving on to the 40s, the war. The war affected Ellis quite a bit.
They had to be careful about what we ate. And I remember eating margarine that was white, which was not very appetizing.
When we go home on vacations, if they were, not just weekends, but vacations, a week or so, you were given your ration books to take with you.
Got it.
And I remember Mother was always upset because they would take the sugar ration stamp for the coming week. Ellis would take it and give me the book. And of course, she couldn't get any sugar then for me.
The students became, I think, more aware of world events during that time. They had the Victory Gardens, which Mr. Meehan helped them plant behind Cottage 3. And they had scrap drives for metal and tin cans, and they really became closer to the community during the 40s.
June of 41 was when I came in. Now we came back to school, and then lo and behold, we got quarantined for polio. We were quarantined from the end of September until Thanksgiving. Nobody came on campus and nobody went off campus. Here we were, this was our first year away from home. We wanted to go home. We wanted to see our mothers. And you couldn't. We couldn't call them on the phone because we weren't allowed phone privileges, not unless it was an emergency.
Moving into the decade of the 50s, the first major event happened on February 20th, 1950. When Ellis Hall burned. That fire changed Ellis immensely. The fire was recognized by passing motormen on the trolley as well as a milkman delivering milk. Firemen came, and it was below zero that night, 10 below. One of the good stories that came out of it, the seniors who were in Cottage 7 at the time, with Alice Johnston as their cottage mother, were organized, and they ran across the playground over to Cottage 6, opened it up, and made hot coffee and baked goods for all the firemen, where they could come in and get respite from this minus 10-degree cold.
The 1909 Ellis Will stipulated that the school be founded on non-sectarian principles. It also included a daily reading from the King James English Bible. When I was at Ellis, religion was handled this way. Every Sunday, we were picked up by various churches and transported to church services. Also, we had Sunday Vespers, and every meal we started with a Christian hymn. What about other religions? Well, there was a large population of Catholic girls there, so we observed meatless Fridays. What about Jewish girls? Patty Wasserberger told me that on Sundays, when all the other girls went to their various churches, they had Sunday study. She told me it felt like a punishment.
Well, I soon found out that many of the students had had no interaction with Jewish people or had even spoken with someone like me. And here is just an example of what happened during one of the first gatherings as a whole class when I entered. Two girls kept following me, circling me, passively taunting me. When asked what was going on, their answer was, "We are looking for her horns." I am not sure that I remember what happened after that. I'm also not even sure I knew how and what to respond. But believe it or not, we survived and went on to become the three amigos, or one Jew and two Christians. All of us know by now, but did not understand then, that prejudice is birthed from what we do not know. I'm grateful. I don't think everything should be a smooth road. I think you only learn from the bumps in the road.
My research topic was, should Girard College be integrated? I took tons of notes. My mother drove me down to Race Street in Philadelphia one evening for me to interview Cecil Moore, who was the head of the NAACP. And I interviewed him for my paper that I was writing for Mrs. Barrett for Problems of Democracy. So here I go. I just think I'm Nancy Drew. I don't know who I think I am. Brenda Starr. And I have this clipboard with all the questions I'm going to ask him. And I had to wait 2 hours before I could get in because he was providing legal aid to all the people who couldn't pay for legal services. So when it was my turn to go in, I sat down, opened up my clipboard, and burst out crying. It was overwhelming. I mean, I led a sheltered life.
In the fall of 1968, following the contentious Girard School integration court battle, Ellis's white fatherless girls will stipulation was eliminated as the school accepted its first black student, Fleeter Dade. I asked Fleeter how she felt that first day. She said she felt a lot of pride with all the media attention, but also that first year she did not really enjoy it. She did not feel all that comfortable.
Fleeter was supposed to be an assigned grow girl. It was like a big sister. She was supposed to be for us, being that we were African American kids coming to the school. Fleeter just seemed so angry all the time. She seemed like, and I remember looking at her kind of in admiration, like, wow, because she would wear that big fro, that big afro. And she just seemed like she was a distant star. The pool that was back there at the back end of the campus. Remember the pool? Yeah. And I remember Mara and Helen, Lucy wanted to go swimming. And I kept saying, I need a swim cap. I have to have a cap over my hair. My hair will shrink up. I can't, and they didn't understand. Yeah. And it wasn't until, I think it was 9th grade, I was wearing my hair straight back then. And so I came back, I was a little more self-assured. I came back with the straightening comb. I don't know if you remember this, Rose, but me, Mara, Lucy went to the home ec room. And I had washed my hair and I wanted to hot comb it. And we were in there and I'll never forget, Mara said, "Oh my God, you're gonna burn your hair. It smells like it's burning." And I was like, "No, it's okay. This is how I have to get it straight." And it was just so cute when I look back on it because she didn't know. This was new to her. She didn't know anything about black hair care. I was usually with Mara, and Mara's white, Lucy's white, and Helen's white. When we walked to the square, I was just like the goofball, like, "Oh, okay, we're going." Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. So I was just one of those kind of kids. And so I'd follow and go, and he was just so rude towards us. He was like, "You niggers," and called the Mara like, nigger lovers, like, because the white kids were hanging. And Mara was very outspoken and she was really pretty protective of me a lot of times. And she felt like she needed to be the one to speak up. And she would say, and she said something back to him. And then she said, "Come on, let's get out of here. We don't want anything out of here." I was used to being around white kids, so it was no big deal. And I just thought that everybody saw us like I saw us. I didn't think that they looked at me like, "Who's this black kid with these white kids walking around the store?"
I got teased for talking proper and all that kind of stuff. And it was just the way it was. I mean, it was just a part of the way things were.
The nights of the actual dances, I was basically sitting there because not many of the guys would ask us to dance. My mom was a teacher with the school district. A friend of hers who was a teacher was from Bermuda. This lady said, my nephews are at Valley Forge. I'll tell him to look up your daughter for the next dance. But who he liked was my friend, Mara. He was attracted to Mara. And she was like calling him a jerk all night, but she liked the attention she was getting. And then by the end of the night, he asked for her number to call her. And I thought, this can't be happening. It was just like, I was like, so he likes the white girl, not the black girl.
Some of the tuition students who came in were of a higher financial standing. Trips to Italy every year with the Frances became an important thing for many students, while the scholarship students, just couldn't partake in that. So the schism between the scholarship students and the financially well-off students seemed to widen at that time.
Everybody knew what side of the coin we were on, either tuition or scholarship. And a lot of it might have just done because all the girls from Philly were scholarship.
There was paying students, and then there was those of us that didn't pay because of having lost our fathers. But we all wore uniforms.
I think the uniforms were an equalizer because we had very wealthy people from Maryland and New York that, of course, had beautiful clothes. Some of us didn't have such beautiful clothes.
For special outings and on the weekends when the boys from
Valley
Forge would come, I would be going into other people's closets to wear something nicer because I didn't have a lot of nice clothes. And certainly for the formals.
I was an upper middle class Jewish girl who came to Ellis with every single color combo outfit that they made in Villager and Ladybug that my family had bought me out of their guilt for sending me away. This was before uniforms at Ellis, so everybody wanted to dress like me. Jewish girls didn't wear Weejuns where I came from. Jewish girls wore Papagallo shoes, saddle shoes of a certain brand. We didn't wear Weejuns, and the whole look was Weejuns and cable knit knee highs and circle pins, which I might have had a circle pin, but I didn't have the whole look that you're born into.
My friend Sue said she used to iron blouses for $1 of the tuition kids, and we would do that down in the basement, and sometimes we would do their laundry. So there was a sort of a subservient element that if we wanted to earn some spending money.
Now, I was in awe of some of the wealthy girls like Lee, because her parents would come in on their Bentley and then take us all out, a little group of us. And Patty Murray, her parents were the major owners of Lord & Taylor. So her parents would come in, again, on their Rolls Royce or Bentley or whatever, and then they would take the 3 roommates out, and we could go to Lord & Taylor and get anything we wanted. In terms of how we treated each other or felt more or less, absolutely not. We were all just together.
Most schools had a lot of school traditions and rituals, but I would suspect that Ellis is on the upper end of that number. Senior steps, tree planting, and the gold dress. That dress was handed down for decades to the girl with the, quote, most hourglass figure. And there were many more.
Dr. Look had a habit, a very nice personal habit, of remembering every single graduate on their birthday. And he sent an Ellis postcard to every graduate with a personal note. And he did that for 30 years.
If somebody had a birthday, I remember Sandy was our chef. She loved baking. So she would always make the birthday cakes.
Was Sandy a student?
Yes.
But I was playing basketball, and Doe Clayton, who you probably know, she said something like, "Oh, my big sister can do anything." And I went, "What?" And she said, "Will you be my big sister?" So Doe and I are still in contact and still call each other big sis and little sis. We marched down the aisle. We were on the stage, and the juniors came. And then at the end of graduation, we walked around the gym. They walked around behind us to the tune of Pomp and Circumstances. And then at some point, they stepped forward and we stepped back.
The time capsule was planted under each tree for the classes. Mr. Meehan met with each class and they had a class tree and they decided where on campus it would be planted. And it was usually done sometimes Arbor Day, sometimes commencement weekend, so that all the alumni would be there, all the classes as well as the seniors. And a time capsule was put together by each class, placed in the hole, and then the tree was put in on top of that capsule and planted.
Have we ever dug up any of the capsules?
They were all destroyed when the trees were destroyed and that area bulldozed.
We prepared for months in advance for May Day. We had to select a theme. For instance, this year it was The Wizard of Oz. We had to vote on who the May Queen was going to be, as well as her court. Then there was the choreographed drill. The classes practiced and practiced and practiced so that they could be the best. I don't even know what the prize was, except that we were the best.
The Alumni Association also came to the campus at the invitation of the school in the first week of June, commencement weekend, and also for Labor Day. Alumni, their children, their grandchildren, because they were included in all of the tree planting ceremonies, the graduation ceremonies, alumni and senior dances. I mean, they were incorporated within the current life of the school.
The best part was having all these wonderful people in my life. The worst part was graduation. Everybody's excited to leave. You're 2 weeks out and you realize all your friends are gone.
By the time the mid-60s came, I think it was 1966, alert went out that we're starting to be in financial trouble. And there weren't enough kids coming along in the pipeline. And of course, I find out later how important the Alumni Association had been in filling that pipeline.
You had a board that was the bank, the trustees of the trust. So one of the things that happens in that case, and by the way, Ellis was not alone in this, but schools that were set up with trust funds like that, one thing they didn't do was go out and raise money. Ellis, from a governance point of view, that wasn't in their MO. Oh, we should think about doing this and so forth. So they got caught, I think, in a period of declining funds in order to continue to run the school.
That was probably why we were expanding the enrollment to state girls. Just trying anything, there was a money issue. They couldn't maintain that idyllic life.
I was in a foster home and the foster home was not working out. And the foster parents said it was because I wasn't a delinquent. I followed all the rules. They didn't know what to do with me. So my caseworker suggested Ellis as an option. There were requirements. You had to have good grades. You had to have an IQ that was high enough to get in the school.
Also in the 70s, the beginning of drugs on campus, and there were clubs started to try to fight the drug problem. I know I was on campus visiting to interview some people while it was still there. And when I got into the cottages themselves, I noticed graffiti on the doors and heavy smoke in the bathrooms. And I was a professor at that point, so I knew the smell of weed. I mean, I could just see the cultural change on campus. And the staff and faculty wanted to change it, but couldn't. The cottage mothers and the young young couples, they couldn't change it. But it was just a direction that was very, very strong. And of course, many students were dropping out.
Certain members of the senior class would come to Sunday supper tripping. And the social dean's husband attempted to excuse them because, and they thought it was really funny, you know, when you've had a little too much to drink or you're tripping, anything can set you off. So gales of laughter, and they're tossing grapes, you know, you're seeing the grapes go like this. And he excused them, and the two of them, we watched in absolute silence as they wove their way up to the linen closet, because there was a china linen closet. The doors out were over here, and the linen closet's here. And they went in, and the door closed behind them. And we're all waiting, and waiting. And finally, poor Mr. McCarraher had to go up and open the door and escort them out. And the solution to that was to stop having Sunday supper.
I was in the classes that the fight to keep the school open. I believe I was in 10th grade that fight started, and every year we didn't know if we would be able to graduate. And it wasn't until, I believe, we were juniors that we were told, yes, you could graduate, but the class after us didn't know if they would be able to graduate. So it was a very painful time. There was a lot of rumors about the financial mismanagement, and so there was a lot of hard feelings about it.
The Board of Trustees, I think it was I can't remember now whether it was my junior or senior year. I suspect it was my senior year. They made the decision to close the school. And then it was sort of death by a thousand cuts, because it took a long time relatively. And in girls' years, that's hard because you're trying to graduate from school. So morale was low.
There was something for everyone here.
I'm gonna cry.
But it was just, it's really sad that it could not carry on and that it had to close.
It was heartbreaking. And there was a valiant fight to keep it open with a lot of the parents and the teachers. There was vigorous defense at the Philadelphia Orphans Court.
My mom didn't pay for anything. And then when I left Ellis, they paid for the tuition for school for me to finish out at St. Hubert's.
One of the last nights, we staged a protest up the main drive at night. We didn't want to go. We just all came out of the cottages and took over the main drive briefly until the authorities dispersed us. I mean, it wasn't a riot, let's say. It was more symbolic. But we had to make our stance. We're mad. We want to stay.
I don't know that if it really sunk in that we were never coming back.
They let us down in a lot of ways, but it was the world. You know, they just weren't up to the major challenge that the world was at that point.
The 70s really continued some of the upheaval that had begun in the late 60s. And the war was still going on, which of course was of great concern to the students and the clubs which were organized to discuss it. But early in the 70s, Dr. Frantz and the trustees decided on yet another building program. And this was to build a new arts studio and modern dance studio attached to the existing gymnasium. At the time, we alumni heard about it, and of course, we had been involved in meetings on our own about, hey, if they're in the red, why are we doing building with, you know, the enrollment going down? And that was a big discussion topic among the alumni, and we had no ability to impact it at all. They were going to close it in '74, and then they got a reprieve, and nothing really got better, and then it was going to close again, and then finally it closed in '77. They just couldn't get out of the hole that they were in, and it was just a shame.
There are a lot of factors that went into Ellis's closing. Certainly, the increased benefits of Social Security, the improvement of public schools and access to good schools, the overbuilding that occurred on the campus strained finances, and then finally, boarding and single-sex education weren't fashionable anymore. But the Charles Ellis Endowment does live on. The Ellis Trust provides enrichment opportunities for girls all over the Philadelphia area. One of the original questions I had in making this film was, what impact did this school have on us as alumni? For me, I think the word is resilience. And that is that this school gave us the kind of opportunities and resources that we needed as young women to go out and make our mark on the world.
I blossomed it, and it just was amazing. I owe a lot to that school.
It was a lifesaver. I mean, it meant everything to us. And I mean, Charles Ellis, definitely my benefactor.
I treasure the memory. I am so grateful I have it. It was structured, it was safe, it was wonderful, and I loved it.
Ellis, to thee, a grateful song we raise. From loyal hearts, we deal our abundant praise.